Hot takes. You are familiar with the concept, I'm sure, as you probably see them every single day on social media. In fact, some people have built entire platforms off of delivering hot takes. And don't get me wrong, sometimes they can be fun, and sometimes they can even be great conversation starters. But on the flip side of that, sometimes they are also used for nothing more than engagement farming. And sometimes they are so bad that you have to wonder whether or not the person delivering them is either delusional or just saying things for attention. And those are the kind of hot takes we're going to be talking about today in regards to Superman. Full spoiler warning is in effect if you haven't seen the movie already. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
All I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
So Superman has been out for 2 days as of the recording of this video. It's actually been out a little bit longer than that because everyone with something to gain somehow saw this movie early.
I understood that reference.
And some people would have you believe that the reaction to this movie has been overwhelmingly positive. And that might be believable if they weren't using Rotten Tomatoes scores as proof. But truthfully, I think the reaction to this movie has been a lot more mixed than some people would like to admit. I cannot tell you how many times I heard this week that somebody was looking forward to this movie, but left feeling underwhelmed. And I think the reactions to this movie very much proves something that I've talked about on this channel many times before. That being, when it comes to the fanboy community, while sometimes I do admire their dedication, and I do appreciate healthy conversation with most of them when they are willing to have it. But when it comes right down to it, most times they are looking at a movie like this very differently than you or I would.
That makes sense.
Meaning that it's more about surface level gratification with them than it is looking at this film through a legit critical lens. And I'm not even necessarily saying that that's a bad thing. That's something that fandom has always done to an extent. But I do believe that some of them have gotten so complacent at this point that they have now resorted to just saying the most outlandish things, just to prop up this movie as much as humanly possible, and it is starting to feel a little bit desperate. It's the MCU effect, ladies and gentlemen. It's been going on for years over there in that fandom, and now it's infiltrated the DC fandom. They say things like this, for instance, when showing a screenshot of Hawkgirl from the new movie, and proclaiming that, quote, she's not just Hawkgirl, she's the Hawkgirl.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
Now, the critical side to me instantly has to ask the question, what exactly did you see from her in this movie that makes you comfortable calling her the definitive Hawkgirl? Because based on what I saw in this movie, she was a pretty nothing character. How was she slaying or serving exactly, as the kids on Twitter say? Because all she was serving from where I was sitting was a strong dose of mediocrity. I mean, she screamed, she poked a kaiju in the eye, she committed a war crime, and then she screamed some more. That's about it. Now, when I dared question this logic on X, some people responded and were none too happy with me. Most of the responses boiled down to a petty insult of some kind, and people telling me it was just her introduction. How fleshed out did you want her to be? And I would respond to those people and say, correct, it was just her introduction, and a bare bones one at that. And that is precisely why it's pretty hard to be calling her the Hawkgirl, especially when the DC animated universe Hawkgirl still exists. This kind of proved to me that people don't require any kind of character development or story arc, or hell, even a memorable performance before they start calling an underdeveloped side character peak. It's very strange. Something similar is happening with the character of Lex Luthor in this film, with more than a few posts like John's here that said, quote, the best Lex Luthor of all time. Absolutely floored by how evil, vile, and ruthless he was. Generational villain up there with Heath Ledger's Joker.
You serious?
Comparing a villain to Heath Ledger's Joker has become the meaningless equivalent of referring to every new DC movie as the next Dark Knight. It's been 17 years of comparison at this point, and I've yet to see anything that comes even close to that villain or that movie. So to desperately try to compare a villain that is nowhere near on that level of sophistication sounds rather silly to me. Plus, before anyone calls him the best Lex Luthor of all time, I encourage you to remember that Smallville's Lex Luthor still exists. You know, sometimes with takes like these, I start to feel like these people really don't have any idea what it takes to make a compelling villain. He has to be a little bit more than crazy facial expressions, a lot of yelling, and just another one-dimensional mustache-twirling villain. I mean, what do we know about this Lex at all? Do we know his motivations? Do we know why he hates this version of Superman so much? Is anything below the surface explored with him at all? The answer to all of these questions is no. All I got from this character is that he's an insecure James Gunn stand-in that basically punishes and imprisons people who say bad things about him.
S-O-F-capital-T, soft, huh?
Okay, great, but when Jimmy Olsen's sex life gets more development than Superman's greatest foe, I think I'm gonna have to call bullshit on him being the greatest live-action Lex Luthor of all time. And then we have the ever-controversial Jorel lore change that surprisingly some of the fanboys are making excuses for instead of being outraged like they normally would. How convenient. High Top Alex here says, quote, "I don't mind the fact that they make Jorel evil. I think it's almost essential that a modern Superman not be told his morals and actively try to put on a goofy costume and dedicate himself to humanity. I loved when Smallville did that before undoing it later. LOL." Now, not only is this the most hypocritical thing ever, because he would clearly be complaining about comic accuracy if James Gunn wasn't directing, but also, do you not get the feeling like I do that when people say things like this about Superman, that they don't actually like the character as much as they claim to?
I knew it, I'm surrounded by assholes.
I understand taking liberties to make the story a bit more cinematically appealing, but changing the very essence of the character, changing what his family stood for, seems like you are overstepping just a little bit, doesn't it? It kind of feels like you're just making changes just for the sake of being different, and you haven't really thought about how this drastically changes everything. I could see if this was considered an Elseworlds tale or something like that, but correct me if I'm wrong, this is supposed to be the main Superman moving forward. And yes, Smallville did do something similar, but they were also smart enough to undo it later. But as it stands right now, it is a questionable decision that has a lot of people scratching their heads and asking whether or not this is necessary.
Why?
And then we have the now infamous Supergirl scene. And to be fair, this post is much less a hot take as it is trying to explain why this scene went down the way that it did. While posting panels from the Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow comic, this person said, quote, "Quite literally her first introduction in one of her best comics. Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is her being a drunk mess, a party girl through the galaxy. This is not the issue you want to force yourself to believe that it is." First of all, just because something happens in the comics does not make it good. And it also does not make it appropriate for a live-action adaptation. One thing that straight comic book fans don't really seem to realize yet is that you have to treat and approach these two mediums very differently. You are making content for a smaller, more niche, more informed audience when you're writing comic books. For films, you are trying to appeal to everyone, including the general public. So in that context, do we really think that the best way to introduce this version of Supergirl to a new audience is to have her stumbling around drunk and calling Superman a bitch? I mean, have you ever heard anything more James Gunn in your life? It's like James Gunn picked up the Woman of Tomorrow comic, he saw a drunk, irresponsible, and rude Supergirl, and said, "That's my Supergirl, sign me the f*** up." I don't know, again, I just feel like that's not how I would have introduced her, especially considering she is the next solo film in the DCU, and also thinking about what it could mean as it pertains to how her character is perceived moving forward. And finally, we have this take from George, who says, quote, "James Gunn is definitely the best comic book movie director of our generation, right?"
No, don't like that.
Well, at least he had the decency to frame it as a question and not use Rotten Tomatoes scores to prove his point. So I'll give him that. As far as the question itself, listen, it's been very established that James Gunn has a style all his own. And it works for some people, and it definitely doesn't work for others. But I think the fact that his work has proven to be so divisive, especially lately, kind of answers the question, doesn't it? And I don't really know what they mean by our generation, but a generation has been described as 20 to 30 years. And if we're looking strictly at that time frame, I think Christopher Nolan and Sam Raimi would like a word. Considering they made comic book films that are still considered some of the best to this day. Films that basically every comic book movie strives to be, both from an impact and quality perspective. So no, to me, James Gunn is not the best comic book movie director of our generation. But he is very good at adding cringe comedy, undermining source material characters, and having stand-in characters in the projects that he makes, so he has that going for him, I guess.
Y'all be cool. Right on.